Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be talking about what is possibly the worst album ever made. Now there's some awful albums out there, but everyone knows they're awful. But what makes an album truly awful is when it is actually awful, but it has an incredible reputation for being one of the greatest albums ever made in the history of mankind by any musician on the planet. The album I'm going to talk about today is Such an Album. Now this originally was going to be part of the What's in My Car series, where I discuss an album that is in my car. It's a random thing. I just pick whatever album I'm listening to that week and I just talk about it. So it takes out the me choosing. It's more about what I'm actually choosing to listen to rather than what I'm choosing to talk about. Now, that plan has actually been scuppered because this week, knowing that I would be doing that, I decided to go and put an album that is a brilliant album in so I could talk about that. Now, the album is this one here, Astral Weeks by Van Morrison. Now, I believe that this is one of the most truly awful albums ever made. And I'm going to tell you a story of why I arrived at this opinion. Now, this story is convoluted and strange. And involves a lot of twists and turns, and I'm sure it's coloured my opinion of this album, right? But let's start at the beginning, right? As a younger man, when I was listening to all my lovely progressive rock and jazz and fusion and all that sort of stuff, I had a vague awareness of who Van Morrison was. As far as I was concerned, he was the guy that sung and wrote the tune Moondance, which I quite liked. As a young boy, I associated that song with Jenny Agutter. Jenny Agutter had made a very big impression on me when I watched The American Werewolf in London as a younger man. And the soundtrack of Moondance accompanied her in that film. And so I had quite pleasant associations with Van Morrison. I had nothing against the guy at all right? But I didn't really want to listen to any of his stuff. I did think his voice was a little bit annoying, and we will get onto that in a minute. Okay, so years passed. I'm in 2000. I'm in a band with Robert Plant. Robert Plant put a band together called The Priory of Brian. And The Priory of Brian was a band where he was going to explore some of the songs that influenced him. And one of the songs we did was Baby Please Don't Go. Now, this is a song that Van Morrison sang in the early 60s. It's a very, very important song in rock history. And it's a very great song. I love Baby Please Don't Go. And so I started to take an interest in Van Morrison and started to check out some of his stuff. I think I got the Moondance album, which I thought was okay, but he didn't knock me out. So anyway, whilst I was playing with Robert, at one point we then get booked in to do a gig somewhere in Wales. And the guy that owned the venue was friends with Van Morrison. And he started to tell me and sort of boast about how he knew Van Morrison, they were best mates and all this type of stuff. And I remember as he was talking to me, he collapsed. He was so drunk that I remember he fell literally like bang like that straight into me. And that's why I remember it. But I can remember the conversation because of that. But what he was saying, that he was going to try and organise a tour with Robert and Van Morrison. This would be, I suppose, a co-headlining tour, because although Van Morrison is a living legend, so is Robert Plant. So a tour was put together across Ireland, a short tour, which was a very enjoyable tour. I think we landed in Dublin and we did a couple of dates on our own in Dublin. And then we set off in a little white minibus, Robert included. We had a lovely guide. The minibus driver happened to have an encyclopedic knowledge of Ireland. And so, because Robert loved this so much, we started to take all sorts of detours to abbeys and famous idyllic settings and all this, looking at the history of Ireland. It was a wonderful thing as we travelled down to Cork. When we arrived in Cork, I never saw Van Morrison. We were playing in a great big tent, which probably would have had about 5,000 or 6,000 people in it. So we all get ready, we put all our stage clothes on and we walk towards the gig. And we get backstage. Now, the dressing rooms on these sort of gigs are like usually caravans. They're a little bit separate at the back of the big tent. So we walk up, we get onto the side of the stage and we look out and we see that there is no audience there whatsoever. And I turned to Robert and said, oh, what are we going to do? There's nobody there. And Robert said, we're going to go out and play full out, which we did. We went out and fronted it. And as soon as we hit it hard, suddenly all these Irish, Van Morrison fans suddenly start to swell in. And by the end of the first track, we filled the tent out. I remember that a certain respect, I think, was being shown to Van Morrison. I mentioned this to a number of people, and I remember the comment coming back, well, you've got to remember that Van Morrison is the King of Ireland. In Ireland, he's very well respected. He's a very important artist in Irish history. Right, so that was interesting to see the respect this guy had. We went then to Galway, doing another one of these big gigs in a big tent somewhere. And I can remember we were playing first, although it was supposedly a co-headlining tour, it did feel like Robert was opening up for Van Morrison in Ireland, which I found quite interesting. So once we'd finished our set, I started to pull my drums off. This is always the problem when you do a support slot. Even at that level, you've got to make sure your drums could come off. And we brought all the drums off, and I was just trying to pull it back on the back of the stage. That was, behind the stage, there was a little area with doors that you came in, and then there was about 20 foot between that of I think grass to where the dressing rooms were. So I'm pulling my kit out, and this guy comes over, part of Van Morrison's crew, and he says, you have to leave now. And I said, why? And he said, because Van Morrison is coming in. And I said, but I've got an access all areas pass. And he went, oh, well, you'll have to stand with your back against the wall of the tent when he comes in, and don't look at him, which I did. But I think I did look at him as you would gaze at Medusa. And what I saw from my vantage point was a big black chauffeur-driven car pulled up 20 foot away where the dressing rooms were. Van Morrison came out with a couple of bodyguards or minders or whatever it was. He got into that chauffeur-driven car and then drove the 20 foot from there to the back of the stage, where he then walked in and no one was allowed to talk to him. This did not impress me particularly, right? I thought nobody should be treated like that. I didn't understand why, anyone would want to treat anybody like that. So that's then I had now a negative impression of Van Morrison, and I think that is going to colour this review as it goes forward. So I do apologise, but it's an interesting story. I said to Robert, what was he doing all that for? And he was like, oh, he said, Van Morrison is a very, very important now. He's a brilliant, brilliant artist. Have you heard Astral Weeks? And I said, no, is it good? And he went, it's an amazing album. And he says, and you like jazz, Andy, and it's got some jazz players on it. There's a lot of improvisation. You should check it out. And he walked into his living room at the time. He pulled out his CD and he gave it to me. This CD is Robert Plant's CD that was given to me 24 years ago from his collection, right? I'm sure he's got quite a few different copies of this. But he felt that he did this quite often. I've got a few albums where he said, you've got to hear this album. And so he handed me this album. And I went on and I put it on 24 years ago. And I can't remember my reaction at the time, but I know I thought it was absolutely awful. I can't remember any specific tracks of awfulness. And then I stuck it into my collection where it has resided unplayed for 24 years. So here we are now with this big YouTube that I'm doing, chatting to all you music fans, and I'm trying to come up with ideas. And I think, well, I will go and stick this masterpiece in my car and I'll listen to it for a week. And then I will report back. And I'm sure now I'm 56 years old and I'm much more mature with much more knowledge about, the history of music and what this represents. I will appreciate this album. I'm afraid I didn't appreciate this album. This album is really pants. It's so boring. It's indulgent. It's just awful. So let's have a look at the lineup. This album, I think, was recorded in New York. I'm not too sure when the date was. It doesn't say here. This was released in November 1968, the year of my birth, right? On it, we've got a number of musicians. Obviously, Van Morrison on vocals and guitar. We've got Jay Berliner on guitar. We've got the legend that is Richard Davis on double bass, jazz bass player. We have the other legend, which is Connie Kay on drums, one of my favourite drummers. I like extravagant drummers, but I also like drummers that are very economic and tasteful. If you were to say an example of an economic, tasteful drummer, I would say Connie Kay. I was brought up on Connie Kay. I was absolutely brought up on him. Can I pull an album out here? I've got so many Modern Jazz Quartets albums. And I'm just seeing if I could just spot one now, but I can't. Never mind. But, nah. But I have a lot of Connie Kay's drumming on album. I love his playing. So, you know, this, I should be loving this, you know, because it's like folk music. It's not the best, is it? But if they get some jazz players on it, surely that's gonna up the ante, isn't it? So, I will now report to you what I heard. This CD didn't last a week, it lasted 2 days. I could not stand it anymore. To me, it was, I don't mind an unlistenable album. I could listen to that, I could appreciate unlistenable stuff. I could appreciate its unlistenableness. This is just turgid, boring, pretentious nonsense. That's what this album is. Right, it opens up with Astral Weeks. Astral Weeks churns away over, you know, the 3 chords, I assume C, G, and D. You know, the 1, 4, 5. It churns over those chords for ages. Eventually settles into, I think, just 2 chords. And then they start jamming over the top of it. The only guy that is actually doing anything interesting in terms of improvisation is Richard Davis. He's not doing the usual jazz thing, but he's exploring interesting, quirky lines. Do the rest of the bands react to it? Of course they don't, because they're rubbish. What you hear is a load of low-grade, waffly improvisation. I've taught in music colleges. It's the sort of thing I've heard coming out of rehearsal rooms all my life. Completely unimaginative. It goes nowhere. Now, whilst this is going on, Van Morrison mumbles his way through some lyrics, which I'm sure are very poetic, but I have no interest in listening to them because I don't want to hear the music. But in amongst the mumblings, every now and then, just as you are feeling like you are able to sort of drift away because this music is so uninteresting, he yelps. Like that, and then you, oh my God, what are you going to do that for, Van? You've scared me then, but don't do that again. You know, he chunters on a bit there. Oh my God. Well, I found myself getting quite panicky. It was an exquisite blend of awfulness. An exquisite blend, right? I did my 10 overrated albums recently. I didn't put this one on it because my definition of overrated is it's good, right? It's good, but it's overrated. This is in a class of its own. This is an absolute class of its own. Now, anybody out there like this album? Because I want to know what you like about it. Right, now these first 4 songs, Astral Weeks, Besides You, Sweet Things, Cypress Avenue, I could not tell when one was starting and the other one was ending. I just could not tell. It's like, I think, listening to this, you know, say if you were being like in a traumatic situation, like you were being tortured or something, you might find your brain would remove yourself from the situation. It would wander off to more pleasant memories. You know, you might picture your children when they were younger, or, you know, or a romance, you know. But you can't picture those things with this because he's singing about romance. He's singing about all these things. But I don't want to hear him. I'm not interested in him. I'm not interested in his girlfriends or his romantic life, because I think that is the theme of this album. I assume Astral Weeks are the weeks that you have in the beginning, because this album is in 2 halves. They've tried to make it seem conceptual. So the first side's called In the Beginning, the second side is called Afterwards. So I imagine that's the beginning of a relationship and at the end of the relationship. I didn't get that from the music. I got that from that bit on the back, right? So the first 4 tracks go on, and I can't tell when one's beginning. They seem all in the same key, all the same set of chords. There's no melody there, just Van Morrison aimlessly twiddling along while some what sounds like folk musicians twiddle about in the pentatonic and major scale. Nothing is going on these albums. It's truly wretched. Right, then, and this is the killer, then you get to track 5, The Way Young Lovers Do. That's a good song. right? He changes it. He changes the chords to the minor, and now we have a minor. We have a minor 1, 4, 5. And when he goes to the 5, it's a major, which suggests like a little bit of a harmonic minor sound, and which lends up to sort of Spanish feel. And there's some arrangement. There's some nice brass on it. Now, I think that what Van Morrison was doing here was he knew that these first songs were absolutely crap, and he had to try and get your attention back, right, with a song that's actually okay. It has the effect of going, if you can write songs like this, why are you doing this turgid nonsense? And I think the reason why you do that is to make me go, maybe there's something I'm not getting here. Oh, what am I not getting? What I'm not getting is the grand statement of Van Morrison, isn't it? Van Morrison is a great artist, and he's a visionary. He's a poet, right? And he's seeing something that I don't quite understand. This is back in 1968 when all the bands are trying to do this, and some bands have genuinely done that. But everyone's jumping on the bandwagon. The Beatles brought out, Sgt. Pepper, Pet Sounds has come out, you've had Frank Zappa come out, Dylan's come out with all these groundbreaking albums, all this stuff's happening. And, Van Morrison was grown up as most British people and Irish people, because he's actually Irish, but I collect them all together because over here, that generation was enthralled by American rhythm and blues. And when you listen singing in them, that's what he sounds like. He's a good blues shouter, right? He then wants to, I think on here, try and join the sort of Dylan folk rock thing. And so this is what you start to get, is this sort of ethereal, trippy, poetic stuff, right? I think he's trying to focus on that on this album. He's making a claim which does not win me over. I don't believe it, right? I just don't believe it, right? Now, Van Morrison is loved. I just don't get it. Now, as I've been driving around, I've had people in my car. Everybody's been in my car, whoever they are, have gone, what is this all for music? Can you turn it off? My daughter came in, she sat down. She's a singer and she's interested in music. She listens to like Tina Turner and Chaka Khan and Aretha Franklin, and she listens to all sorts of stuff that is good stuff. And she said, this is awful, what's this? I said, it's Astral Weeks. She goes, why have you got it on, Dad? And I said, because it's a classic album, everyone thinks it's amazing. And she went, it doesn't sound amazing to me. She said, the vocals don't seem to fit the music and the music's boring. And I thought, there is the truth. Right, so anyway, when I got to number 5, I did have a little bit of hope, and I thought maybe 24 years ago when I put it on, I probably only got through those first 4 tracks, and I've never actually listened to these tracks. Right, and then Madame George starts up, which is nearly 10 minutes long. This is the most turgid, boring. It's like he's reached a peak on this point. He's telling me some story that I have no interest. I'm sure everyone's going to shout, yeah, but listen to the lyrics, Andy. Listen to the lyrics, right? I don't want to listen to the lyrics. The music has to be good for me to want to listen to the lyrics. That's why I don't like Bob Dylan. And Bob Dylan has this effect on me. But because I remember buying Blonde on Blonde, but I could look at the dates those albums were made and go, well, that's brilliant. Subterranean Homesick Blues is pretty cool. There's tracks I like and tracks I don't like. I've got a lot of respect for Dylan. I've got a lot of respect for Van Morrison. I'm sure he's done other albums that are absolutely fantastic, but not this one. Why this one? Right. So anyway, Madame George, you ever listen to it? It goes on for 7 minutes. Nothing happens. He's going, and I'm really mad at Madame George. Oh my God, like that. That's going on for about 10 minutes. Come on, please then. Look at how long's this one going on for then? Oh, 10 minutes? God. Oh God, I'm going to try and get through this. 7 minutes in, Connie Kay brings in this swing grooves. And suddenly you feel the energy of jazz coming in. He has got groove, and this swing comes in. And the band just do not react. They sit there like a monolith. Oh, what's he doing on the drums there? What's that ride cymbal? And because Connie Kay is a brilliant musicians hold their place, right? Because the fact that they can't actually groove with this, he still holds his position, and they actually wander out of time, and eventually they stumble, and then they start marching along against, Connie Kay's time, and it just does not sound right. Now, here is the crux of this video, right? I can hear stuff like that. I can hear when musicians haven't got much to say improvisationally, that there is not much going on, when they don't seem to have much melodic invention or harmonic invention, right? I have nothing against tunes made out of 1 or 2 or 3 chords. All the James Brown stuff that I adore is 1 chord, right? I'm a big fan of 1 chord songs or 2 chord songs. It's brilliant, right? But what you have to bring into that is all the stuff that all the black musicians over the last 100 odd years have brought to music, you know, groove, funk, soul, expression, right? And rock music is built upon other musicians that aren't from that culture trying to emulate that, and that's the genius of it. And that's where jazz comes from as well. Jazz and blues comes from an integration of these things. I think I have never understood what happened with American folk music. I know it is the crux of everything. The Beatles meeting Bob Dylan and the crossover between the two of them, which for me is almost personified in that opening chord of Hard Day's Night. That is really, that chord could well be the beginning of rock music, not rock and roll, rock music. And I think there was a zeitgeist, and I think Van Morrison is a part of that. And perhaps if you were swept up in that zeitgeist and you were buying these albums, that an audience that had never heard John Coltrane or heard Steve Reich or all that stuff that was going on at that time could buy a Van Morrison album and get swept away with something they hadn't really heard before, which is these sort of long, they're not modal, but they're very, very long, open improvisations that I'm sure if you were blitzed out of your mind back in 1968 were very interesting, in much the same way as a lot of the stuff on the early Pink Floyd's albums I think was very interesting. But we go back to it now and it's not that great. It's let down by the music, the musical competence, right? This one I think is made worse for having Connie Kay and Richard Davis. I think it shows up right at the top what's going on. I mean, there's this flute player that appears, right? And he starts, you know, Van Morrison goes, and then you get this flute coming in the back going, and it reminds me, if you've ever seen the awful Hobbits film, there is a scene where the dwarfs go and see the elves, and they're sitting down having this lunch, and this hippie elf comes on with the flute, and she's playing the flute round the goblins, or not the goblins, the dwarves. He's playing this flute round them and getting right on their nerves. And one's got this ear trumpet, right? And because he can't hear it. Then when he actually hears the music that's coming off, he's so offended that he smashes his thing up, his trumpet up. Then they go off, strip off naked, and stop doing some yobbery over in the corner. And all the elves look on. I feel like those dwarves do in The Hobbit when I listen to this. I want to smash my ear trumpet up, strip off naked, and start indulging in some yobbery. This is pretentious. This is the sort of thing music critics like. This is the thing that altered the story of rock music, right? These albums are the sort of albums that the critics love, right? But nobody actually really likes except pretentious people who want to pretend that they are erudite. And it meant that bands like Deep Purple and Black Sabbath and Yes and Genesis and Gentle Giant and AC/DC and all the best bands in the world were ignored, and they were demoted down lower. And then time marches on, and then suddenly, because that music lasts, they now have to have a grudging nod. And when I listen to these or read these ridiculous Rolling Stones lists, and they've stuck a Led Zeppelin album in there in the top 10, and think back to the 1980s where Led Zeppelin were vilified, absolutely vilified by that lot. They hated them. They were the most uncoolest band in the world, right? But now, because the music has stood the test of time, right, they have to turn around. And the biggest one on this is AC/DC. AC/DC are one of the best bands in the world, but everybody thought they were rubbish, right? And people here in the UK would compare them to Status Quo. They say, AC/DC is like Status Quo. That's what people used to say to me. But Status Quo are bloody brilliant. They are brilliant, right? Status Quo rock. They have cool lyrics, they're brilliant songwriters, right? That's the bottom line. Now, I'm sure someone's going to research and go, well, you know, Francis Rossi, his favourite album is Astral Weeks. I'm sure it bloody is. I don't get it. These sort of albums, I need to do a top 10 of pretentious albums. I think that's what upsets me more than anything else, right? It's easy to say that Kiss's albums are overrated. It's low-hanging fruit. Kiss are rubbish, right? Kiss, they are just rubbish. That's true. And if I was to say Who's Next by The Who, that's an overrated album, you know. Won't Get Fooled Again is amazing. And Barbara O'Reilly's amazing, but the rest of it I could do with that. It's just, there's a couple of okay tracks on, but it's held up. But The Who are good. That's the thing. The Who are good. When the critics point to it, I go, fair enough. Yeah, you recognise Live at Leeds is probably one of the best live albums ever made. I agree that. But this is rubbish. It's Velvet Underground, isn't it? I myself will say how important Velvet Underground is. I got to be honest though. I have got that Banana album by Velvet Underground, and I got to be honest, things like Venus in Furs and Wait for My Man, I do like it. See, I can like all sorts of music, right? I love a very narrow band of music, but I like all sorts of music. I can appreciate all sorts of music. So for me to find something that I hate so much, I hate Astral Weeks by Van Morrison. It's rubbish. Right? Now, in the comments, we will see the truth, won't we? So tell me what you think, right? And hopefully, what will happen is I'm going to now ignite a fuse of hate that will now spread out through over the whole world, and we'll be able to pull the reputation of this piece of rubbish down, pull it down, and wipe it out. You know, and you know what's going to do it? Is recently Van Morrison has gone out of favour, hasn't he? In the culture of today, because he's spoken out about stuff like a grumpy old man, and he's moaned about the restrictions of COVID, and he probably doesn't like black people and all that type of stuff. Because he's come out saying all that, he's not liked. And so the powers that be will join in, right? They will join in trashing Van. They will pull him down, and his one great achievement, the one grudging thing that they all say, you know, and how he's turned into a right-wing, you know, the mouthpiece of the alt-right, but you know, Astral Weeks was brilliant in its time. That we'll be able to destroy that. Now I feel sorry for Van. He's just an old man now. I don't want to pick on him, but he is sat there with his vast wealth, isn't he? He's a rich man. He's richer than me. I shouldn't feel sorry for him. Look at him pouncing around like he thinks he's king of Ireland. I know, but he doesn't deserve me, some nobody. Oh, the emotional quandaries that I face on this channel. Anyway, I'm pretty sure I'm at the end of the video now. I have went and with the funds I've got from my lovely patrons, I have gone and got an iPhone. I am no longer filming this on a camera. I'm filming it on an iPhone, right? I'm very pleased with this. The audio is a lot better. The visual things seem a lot better. I had a week or so when I was fiddling around with it in the house because I didn't want to keep walking out here. But now we're back in here. I've got my nice little light here. I hope this looks all right. I'm sure I've cocked it up. I can't light anything. I need help, right? I need help here. And so, if you want to support me so I can get some help, because I know the guys that could do it, but I need to be able to pay them. Right, I'm nowhere near paying them, by the way, at the moment. But in the long term, I want to try and do something with this channel. I want to have a channel that champions all the weirder music, all the underground music, all the music that we all love but nobody likes. I don't want this music to die away. And once I've got a big following, I can then approach artists that I feel are really good but need some focus, and not weird indie artists or stuff that sounds like Astral Weeks, but you know, jazz, rock, fusion, prog, rock, classic rock, all the rocks. And I want to, and all the funks, and all the souls, and all the electronica, and everything. And I want to collect the people. I'm sure some of you out there are making music. Then if I like the music, I will put it on the channel. And that's where I'm trying to build. I want to be able to hold on and create a legacy for this music we love, because it will go. It's about to die. It's about to go. It just is the way it is, right? I've said it a million times on it. There's no point in crying about it. There's no point in saying it. Everything's like this. We're all getting older. You know, by the time the generation of rock people, right, once we're all dead, it's gone. It's absolutely gone. The only way it will survive is if people, young people, still listen to it. Now, They will, because I do believe there's something special. It's not just music of its time. There's something special about the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and AC/DC and Black Sabbath. There's something special about it. I mean, it still talks to young people. I see it happen all the time, you know. But we can't let the young ever hear this one. They will put it all in the bin for sure. If you like the video, this was a bit of a joke. This was me just having a good old rant, because people like me ranting. They like negativity on YouTube. So if you enjoyed me in this sort of ranty mode, you know, put a like on and subscribe. I am serious sometimes. I am silly sometimes. I am abstract and weird and philosophical. I'm all these things. I'm like a Renaissance man. You've got to understand this. So if you like it, please like. If you want to subscribe, please subscribe. If you want to support me in my quest to try and, you know, save this music and be able to have a voice, because when I'm dead and gone, hopefully YouTube will still be there, and this will have become a monument to brilliant music. My YouTube will be. It'll be a monument. There'll probably be about 3,000 videos there at that point, because I don't plan on dying. I'm going to do this right up onto my deathbed. And my children will be able to see, be like a big memorial to me. This is what I'm really building as I've got into my latter years, is I'm building a huge memorial to myself. This is almost like one of those great big pyramids in Giza. It's my pyramid of rock. And if you want to help me create the pyramid of rock, you can go to Patreon and support me there, or you can go over to my PayPal tip jar and stick a bit of cash in. That is my message at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.